Hi everyone, welcome to my Smart Learning YouTube channel. I hope you can make good use of my Smart Learning YouTube channel to learn new knowledge and become a smarter and happier person. Since I have spent lots of time and effort in producing this kind of YouTube video, so I would like to ask you to make some donation. I welcome your donation. If you want to support me, you can make donation through PayPal or Venmo. My PayPal account is paypal.me/gracef327, or you can Venmo me. My Venmo account is at grace_Rainier. Thank you very much for your support. In this video, we will continue to talk about the topic of economic globalization. In this slide, we are going to talk about the characteristics of the new round of economic globalization. In the past 2 decades, international trade and investment have grown rapidly, and economic activities have gradually transcended national borders, forming a globally integrated economic system. Here are some of the characteristics of this kind of economic globalization development. First, the importance of international trade. The growth of trade has played an important role in the integration of the global economy. Over the past 2 decades, world trade has grown twice as far as the world's GDP average, at 6% for the former and 3% for the latter, and export now account for almost 1/5 of the world's GDP. This situation is more pronounced in developing and low-income countries. Over the past decade, the trade component of GDP has increased by 7% in developing countries and 10% in low-income countries. Export now account for a quarter of developing countries' gross domestic product. Second is the global division of manufacturing production activity. In global trade, raw materials, which used to play an important role in the past, have been declining, while the trade share of industrial products has increased. Among them, high-tech industries have grown the fastest. From 1985 to 1998, the share of high-tech products in world trade tripled, while the share of raw materials in world trade fell by half. Four, a third, global capital market integration. The barrier to the import and export of international currencies have been greatly reduced, increasing the flow of international currencies. From 1989 to 1997, the international currency transaction volume increased from about 500 billion to 1.5 trillion US dollars per day. Only about 2% of these liquidity funds are used for direct investment, and the rest are mainly used for short-term speculation in financial markets. The inflow and outflow of a large amount of hot money is beyond the control of any national government. For example, the Mexican financial turmoil in 1994 and the Asian financial turmoil in 1997 show the power of some huge hot money. Last but not the least is the multinational operation capacity and scale of private enterprise. With the advancement of technology, multinational companies have brought economic globalization to a deeper and wider stage. Information technology has greatly reduced the cost of managing global production and sales networks, and it has also made it easier for companies to bring products, services, and production technologies to the international market. Multinational corporations can now not only expand their markets on a global basis, but also disperse different processes of production in different countries. They can monitor their operations in a single headquarters. For the importance of multinational cooperation in global economic development, please refer to the Multinational Cooperation Report of the International Labour Organization. Next, we want to talk about the institutional basis and the development motivation of economic globalization. The rapid development of globalization since the 1980s actually depends on changes in the international political situation. In the 1980s, both the United States and the United Kingdom rigorously promoted the idea of free market, which was regarded as a panacea for solving the problems of developing countries. The International Monetary Fund and the World Trade, which dominate the international economic order, are based on this concept to establish the world economic order. Since the 1980s, the policy view of free market has been extended to many countries around the world, making market openness and free trade the hallmark of a new era. To discuss free trade, whether from a historical or theoretical perspective, the formation and information of this free market trend is a good starting point. For further information, please refer to Global Trade Negotiation homepage, Washington Consensus. International trade liberalization. In the 1950s and 1960s, there were still many newly independent countries in the Southern Hemisphere that were extremely dependent on the export of raw materials. Many of these governments firmly believed in building their own industrial production capacity, and also advocate that the government should play an active role in their own economic development. Many Latin American countries have implemented the import substitution strategy. In 1982, Mexico was unable to repay its foreign debts, and the Third World debt crisis broke out. In response to this situation, the World Bank and the IMF began to ask debtor countries to change their economic policy, forming a precursor to the opening of the world market. Related historical development can be seen at Wayne Elwood's The No-Nonsense Guide to Globalization. The program proposed by the IMF and the World Bank are also supported by the U.S. Treasury Department. Since the three institutions are located in Washington, U.S., they are called Washington Consensus. The three pillars are fiscal conservation, privatization, and market liberalization. In box 1 is so the gist of the Washington Consensus. It asks government to discipline its government fiscal policy. It also asks countries to spend more on public health, education, infrastructure, and other projects that help improve economic returns and income distribution. It asks countries to do their tax reform, open their interest rate controls, maintain market exchange rate, promote free trade, open their domestic market to foreign direct investment, privatize their state-owned enterprise, relax their market regulation, and secure private property rights. The Washington Consensus is a consensus on the correct economic policies of developing countries. Many of the ideas are actually derived from the response to the problems in Latin America. The purpose is to solve the high fiscal deficits of many countries in the region and the inflation caused by loose monetary policy. But this consensus was later found to be applicable around the world. Since then, free market and free trade have become the mainstream force in the world. In the mid-1980s, the Uruguay Round of General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, the GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, laid the foundation for the institutionalization of free trade, the World Trade Organization. It was also carried out under the influence of this political and economic chain of force. World Trade Organization, the institutionalization of free trade. The opening of world markets has accelerated since the mid-1980s. International free trade was gradually established in the system during this period. The WTO was formally established on January 1, 1995, but the predecessor of these international organizations, the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, GATT, has a history of more than 50 years. The development of the global free trade system cannot achieve breakthrough until after the mid-1980s. Among them, the Uruguay Round negotiation started in 1986. Trade was the only item placed on the negotiating agenda and provided the basis for the establishment of the WTO, and provide the basis for the establishment of the World Trade Organization. So here is the table 1 showing the process of trade negotiation from GATT to WTO. So now you can see here it started in 1947 up to 1961. The world's major international trade agenda is mainly focused on tariff. At that time, only about 13 to 38 countries participate in this kind of international trade negotiation. It was not until 1986 to 1994, the Uruguay Round of Talk, that international community start to talk more about other aspects of international trade, like anti-dumping measures, trade rules, service industry, intellectual property rights, dispute mediation, textile industry, agriculture, and ultimately they talk about the establishment of the World Trade Organization. It was not until at this time of year that the world start to become more focused on trade integration and develop their economy globally. And we can see that there are more countries participate in this World Trade Negotiation. It was about 123 countries participate in the Uruguay round of negotiations. The emergence of the WTO symbolized that all countries in the world support international free trade and agree that a formal international organization should establish and maintain global free trade. The mission of the World Trade Organization is to establish global rules for trade between countries. Its main function is to make trade flows more freely, smoothly, and with regulation to follow. The core of the World Trade Organization is actually a series of regulations related to international trade, and member countries must abide by these regulations. The WTO regulation mainly include terms of trade in agriculture, industry, and services. The WTO is basically an organization where countries in the world jointly negotiate international trade laws and regulations. Once the regulations are reached, the trade of various countries will be based on this. It is different from the general bilateral trade agreement, which the terms of the WTO are applicable to all members. The highest authority of the WTO is the ministerial meeting, which is attended by official representatives of member states and meets at least once every 2 years to make decisions on international trade agreements. When there is a trade dispute between member states, the WTO also has an arbitration dispute settlement mechanism, which arbitrate the dispute according to the terms of the WTO, and the result is internationally and legally binding. For further details, please refer to the Understanding the WTO. Next, we want to talk about the integration of multinational corporations and the world economy. Since the 1980s, governments of various countries have adopted the policy framework of free market and free trade, and the establishment of the WTO in 1995 has laid a solid foundation for the free trade system. In the context of such institutional changes, private enterprises have greatly expanded into the world market. Due to the operation of multinational enterprises, the spread of economic globalization has been greatly increased. The scale of economic globalization increased greatly in the 1980s and 1990s, with the foreign direct investment and outsourcing of processes by multinational corporations, and the scale and strength of multinational corporations also increased significantly. Multinational enterprises play a more pivotal role in today's international trade. Companies operating in more than one country now account for about a quarter of global exports, and the world's 100 largest multinational companies have foreign sales of $210 billion, equivalent to 7% of global GDP. Most notable of these is the importance of intra-firm product flows, intra-product trade in economics, intra-product trade in economics, in global trade. Intra-firm trade today accounts for about 2/3 of global trade. That is to say, a large part of the global trade activities is actually the allocation of products within multinational companies. Related to this is the evolution of globalized production system. In the past, the international division of production involved industrial countries producing high-tech products, while developing countries produce raw material or low-tech products. The current trend of division of labor is that even for the same products, the division of labor is carried out through the global production network. The example of the personal computer production system is very clear. In simple terms, American companies mainly focus on systematic development and design, such as Intel and AMD leading CPU production, Microsoft leading operating system productions, while Taiwanese companies focus on peripheral devices, including motherboards and monitors, etc. Singapore is dominated by hard disk production. South Korea is leading in memory chips production, such as RAM, and mainland China is the assemble base of various components. Of course, in terms of brands, multinational corporations in advanced countries are still the market leaders, such as Dell, IBM, and HP. Next, we want to talk about multinational enterprise and the integration of world commodity markets. Multinational corporations are the executors of world market integration, connecting the world in both sales and production. Multinational corporations have their bases in different parts of the world by expanding their markets around the world or by merging local companies. The case of Walmart is a typical example. In addition to integrating the world at the market level, multinational companies also integrate the world in terms of production. The Nike case introduced in the next session fully demonstrates the importance of the development of international division of labor system. The Walmart case. Walmart was established in the United States in the early 1960s and has grown into one of today's leading multinational corporations in more than 40 years. It is not only developing rapidly in the US market, but also with its strong economic strength. It has developed rigorously around the world and has considerable influence in many different places. It has more than 3,000 branches in the United States and more than 1,000 in other parts of the world. Today, Walmart has become the largest employer among the world's largest private companies, employing more than 1.2 million people worldwide. Table 2 lists the development milestones of Walmart. So here is table 2 talking about Walmart's development mileage. In 1962, it opened its first retail store in Arkansas, the United States. And then 10 years later, it was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. In 1990, Walmart has become America's #1 retailer. 3 years later, they developed their international division. In 1995, it has 276 US stores and has 93.6 billion in sales and 675,000 employees. In 1997, Walmart has become the United States' largest employer with 680,000 employees. Over 90 million people around the world visit every week. Its annual sales exceed 100 billion. In 1999, it became the world's largest private employer. With 1,140,000 employees. In the year 2002, it was recorded that it has the highest single-day sales in history at the time. It has 1.43 billion sales after the day of Thanksgiving. Walmart first opened a retail store in Arkansas in 1962. It became the largest retailer in the United States in 1990 and established the international division in 1993. It first entered Mexico, Puerto Rico, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and other American countries in the early 1990s. Then entered China through joint ventures in 1996. It entered Germany and South Korea through mergers and acquisitions in 1998. It also entered the United Kingdom's market through mergers and acquisitions in 1999. It entered the Japanese market through mergers and acquisitions in the year 2002. Currently, it has branches in 10 countries around the world, with more than 300,000 employees, and plan to open 120 to 130 more branches in the existing market in the coming years. Table 3 lists Walmart's international business development. So here is an overview of Walmart's international business. It entered the country of Argentina in 1995 and now has 4,000 employees and 12 branches. In 1995, it also entered Brazil and now has 6,000 employees and more than 20 branches and more than 5,000 suppliers. In 1994, it entered the Canadian market through mergers and acquisitions with 52,000 employees and more than 200 branches. In 1996, it entered the Chinese market through joint venture and now has 50,000 employees and more than 30 branches. In Germany, it entered the German market through mergers and acquisitions in 1998 with 50,500 employees and more than 90 branches. It entered the Japanese market in the year 2002 and now has 30,000 employees and more than 400 branches. It now holds 37.8% of Cebu shares. In 1998, it entered the South Korean market through mergers and acquisitions. It now has 15 branches and 3,000 employees. For Mexico, it entered the Mexican market in 1991 and there were more than 600 branches. In Puerto Rico, it entered the Puerto Rico market in 1992. There are 32 branches and 7,500 employees. In 1999, it entered the British market through mergers and acquisitions and now has more than 250 branches and 125,000 employees. Next, we want to talk about multinational enterprise and international subcontracting. In addition to integrating the world at the market level, multinational companies also integrate the world at the production level. Simply put, the global division of labor is the dispersal of different processes in the entire production process to different parts of the world. As a result, multinational corporations can make good use of the advantages of different places, that is, low labor costs, high-tech research capabilities. The international subcontracting system of multinational enterprise has brought about qualitative changes in the international division of labor in the past 2 or 3 decades. In the old system of international division of labor, developing countries concentrated on exporting raw materials and agricultural products, while developed countries mainly import raw materials, which was processed domestically into manufactured products and were mainly sold in the domestic market. With rising labor costs in developed countries, companies are striving to find low-cost production bases, splitting processes, and moving processes with lower technical requirements to developing countries. This was also an important strategy for multinational corporations in the 1980s and 1990s. In this new system of international division of labor, companies in developed countries outsource their production to factories in developing countries and then import manufactured products into their own markets for sale and sell them all over the world. the local corporate headquarters of multinational companies generally focus on product development and marketing. They also manage the entire production system distributed in different countries. The Nike case. The case of Nike is a good example of the development of this globalization of production. Nike's commercial success is not without its marketing promotion, but its global production strategy also contributes to it. Founded in 1964, Nike initially only engaged in the sales of small-scale running shoes. But in the 1970s and 1980s, it was able to successfully find manufacturers in Asia, such as Taiwan and South Korea, to produce for its brand, and successfully develop into the world's leading sports brand. In the 1990s, Nike pushed its South Korean and Taiwanese manufacturers to look for other regions with lower production costs for production. The original Taiwanese and South Korean manufacturers became the middleman. On the one hand, they connected with and manufactured for Nike, and on the other hand, they managed their production system in Southeast Asia. As a result, this international subcontracting system has been further extended to countries with weaker production capacity, such as China, Vietnam, and Indonesia. By the year 2001, Nike's products were produced in 51 countries, with more than 700 factories and more than 500,000 workers. So here is the table 4 talking about Nike's global production network development. This is from the book of Richard M. Rock in 2002, The Promise and Peril of Globalization, The Case of Nike. In 1964, Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman each invested 500 yuan to import running shoes from Japan to sell in the United States. In 1972, it launched the Nike brand. In 1978, the company officially changed its name to Nike. During the 1970s, Nike is mainly produced by two Japanese companies, Nippon Rubber and Nihon Kohyo. In 1970s up to middle and late 70s, Japan's high production costs, Nike tried to produce in the United States while looking for production suppliers in other regions. In the early 80s, South Korea and Taiwan have become the main production area of Nike. 80% of Nike's shoes are made in Taiwan and South Korea in 1982. During the late 80s to the 1990s, rising costs in South Korea and Taiwan causing Nike began to ask contractors to find other low-cost production bases. During the late 90s, Indonesia, China, and Vietnam have become the main production areas of Nike. In 2001, Nike products are produced in 51 countries. It has more than 700 factories. It has more than 700 factories and more than 500,000 workers. In China, they have 74 factories and 1,750,000. It has 1,750,960 workers. In Indonesia, it has 30 factories, 104,504 and 550 and 104,514 workers in Indonesia. In Thailand, it has 62 factories, 47,962 workers. In Vietnam, it has 12 factories and 43,414 workers.